Photosynthesis.
It's what keeps plants alive.
It's what keeps our animals alive.
It's what keeps us alive. It's how this world survives.
And without it,
nothing would exist as we know it.
So it's kind of important, you know, how small plants like this down here get enough energy to climb all the way up big trees like this one. So I hope you ate your sunlight this morning, because today we're talking about
photosynthesis. Where does the word photosynthesis come from?
I don't know, science?
Well, actually, the word photosynthesis comes from the word phos for light.
Let there be light.
And synthesis.
No, not like that. Synthesis, as in to put stuff together.
There are two cycles in photosynthesis. Let's get started on the first cycle.
This one relies on the power of the sun. The sunlight enters a leaf, but then what?
I'm so glad you asked. First, we should go over some things about the leaf structure. In plant cells, there are these things called chloroplasts. This is the site of photosynthesis. Inside the chloroplast, there are structures called granum and stroma, which is the gel surrounding these discs. They're all part of the thylakoid membrane. The granum has these two things called photosystems. In photosystem 2, there is a pigment called chlorophyll. And on to a side lesson about chlorophyll. There are two types of chlorophyll, chlorophyll A and B, and they are both plant pigments. Pigments react with visible light to produce colors. To demonstrate how this works in leaves, I am going to use different colored water to represent sunlight and a cup to represent the leaf. Here I have red and orange, green and yellow, and blue and violet light. They all go into the leaf, and while most of it is absorbed, the green and yellow group is reflected by the chlorophyll. This is what gives the leaves their green and yellow color. Back to the granum. The sun's energy comes in and hits photosystem 2. Now the sun's energy excites the electrons in the chlorophyll in photosystem 2, and they become loose. And since they are excited, they travel in what is called the electron transport chain. This chain is important, and we will be coming back to it later. Now, by the time the electrons reach photosystem 1, they have lost a lot of energy. Luckily, the energy from the sun can recharge these electrons. Now excited again, the electrons travel to something called the NADP reductase. The electrons and NADP combine to form NADPH. Both NADP and NADPH are part of the other part of photosynthesis, the Calvin cycle. We'll worry about that later. For now, let's continue with the light reactions. Remember the transport chain? While electrons are moving, they are letting in hydrogen ions. Ions also come from split water molecules, which replace the electrons chlorophyll lost earlier. Oxygen then leaves the leaf as gas. This is how we can all breathe. So we have a buildup of hydrogen ions in the granum, and they're going to flow into something called the ATP synthase. The ATP that is produced in the synthase is going to be used in the Calvin cycle. Ions will flow through the synthase to provide energy, like a water wheel. As the ions flow through, ADP and the phosphate group combine to form ATP. ATP is used in, you guessed it, the Calvin cycle. So let's learn about the darker parts of photosynthesis. The process starts with a molecule of CO2 and a molecule of RUBP. RUBP is a 5-carbon molecule with 2 phosphates. The CO2 and the RUBP combine to form a 6-carbon molecule, which then splits into 2 3-carbon molecules with a phosphate on each end. Then the ATP from the earlier light cycles comes in, splits, and adds a phosphate group to each end. Then it goes back to the light cycle to be reused. Now the NADPH from earlier comes in and reconfigures the 2 molecules, taking away a phosphate from each. The new molecules are called G3P molecules. Now say you started out with 3 carbon dioxide molecules and everything happened proportionally. You would end up with 6 of these G3P molecules. Out of that 6, only 1 would be used to make sugars within the plant cells, like glucose, and 5 would be regenerated using ATP to make RUBP. And now you know all about photosynthesis and its mind-blowing processes.
That's all, folks.